They say the Ozarks keep their dead close, and their secrets even closer. In the summer of 1909, a 24-year-old woman named Ruth Mallory learned the truth the hard way. It started with a letter, one that should never have arrived. The envelope was thick, sealed in red wax and marked with her late aunt's initials, E.M. But the strangest part? Aunt Eleanor had been buried for 3 weeks. The handwriting shook with age, but the words were clear. "My dearest Ruth, the house is yours now. But heed this warning. Never open the attic door after midnight." Not for any reason. Ruth stared at the paper for hours. She hadn't seen her aunt in years, not since childhood summers in the Missouri hills. Still, the inheritance was real, verified by the county clerk. A farmhouse, 3 acres of land, and an attic key wrapped in a faded ribbon. She left the next morning. The train ride south from St. Louis was quiet, but every stop seemed to bring colder stares. When she told a man she was bound for Elder Hollow, his face went pale. He muttered something about the Mallory place and refused to sit near her again. By dusk, the conductor called her stop. Elder Hollow was less a town than a handful of wooden shacks, half swallowed by forest. The air smelled of pine and old smoke. An old woman selling bread at the station crossed herself when Ruth mentioned her name. "That house breathes when the moon's high," the woman whispered. "You'll hear it soon enough." Ruth forced a smile. But unease followed her all the way down the dirt road. The path twisted uphill through the trees until, at last, the house appeared, a dark silhouette against a bleeding sunset. Tall windows, slanted roof, vines crawling up its ribs like veins on an old hand. It looked less like a home and more like something waiting. Inside, the air was thick with dust and the faint smell of iron. Her footsteps echoed like she wasn't alone. Every clock in the house was stopped, each one frozen at 12:03, and on the dining table lay her aunt's open journal. The ink on the last page was still wet. "I hear it again. It moves in the walls, I think. It knows my name." Ruth's breath caught. The pages before were filled with strange sketches, circles, symbols, bloodlines drawn like maps. She shut the book. "This is nonsense," she whispered. But even she didn't believe it. That night she made a fire and read the will aloud. The flames flickered strangely, as if the air itself exhaled. The shadows shifted, and for the briefest second, she thought she saw her aunt's reflection in the window, smiling faintly in the glass behind her. Then came the noise. Soft at first. A shuffle. A scrape. Ruth froze, candle trembling in her hand. The sound was coming from above. From the attic, she forced herself to laugh. "Probably rats," she said aloud. But the tapping grew rhythmic. Tap, tap, tap. Like someone knocking, politely waiting to be let in. Her aunt's letter burned in her pocket. "Never open the attic door after midnight." She checked the clock on the wall. 11:58. The wind outside fell silent. The entire house seemed to listen with her. Matin sign. Her heart hammered. The candlelight flickered, bending toward the staircase as though drawn upward. The grandfather clock began to chime. Once, twice, 3 times, and then a long, slow creak from above. The sound of a latch turning, and the attic door, closed for decades, swung open on its own. Ruth stood frozen at the bottom of the stairs. The candle guttered out. Something moved in the darkness above her, something breathing, and the last sound she heard before the night went black was a whisper that sounded just like her aunt's voice. "Welcome home." When the candle died, Ruth stood frozen in the dark. Her heartbeat echoed louder than the wind outside. The attic door above her hung open, slowly rocking, as if breathing. But when she called out, her voice vanished into silence. No answer, no footsteps. Just that faint sound again, like lungs pulling in air. She climbed 3 steps, holding the flickering match close. The flame bent toward the attic. There was something up there, then thud. Something heavy dropped just beyond the door. Ruth stumbled back. The match died. She bolted the attic shut and ran to her room, slamming the door. For hours she sat by the window, watching the moon crawl across the black sky. Every creak in the wall sounded alive. Every gust through the chimney whispered her name. When morning finally came, the house looked perfectly still, like nothing had happened at all. But on the floor near the staircase, she noticed footprints, bare, small, and leading down from the attic door. Ruth followed them to the parlor. The prints stopped right at the journal she'd closed the night before. Now it was open again, to a different page. Her aunt's handwriting looked desperate, like each line was carved in fear. The house breathes because it remembers. Do not feed it your voice. Do not answer when it calls. Ruth snapped the book shut, trembling. This is insane, she muttered. She needed air. Outside, the morning fog clung to the trees like smoke. The nearest neighbor was over a mile away, an old trapper named Silas Wren. She found him sitting on his porch, sharpening a knife that looked older than he was. "Morning," she called. He didn't look up. "You're the niece," he said flatly. "Didn't figure anyone'd stay there after what happened." "What happened?" Ruth asked. He spat into the dirt. "Your aunt wasn't right in the head. Claimed she heard the house talking. Said it wanted blood." Ruth frowned. "You don't believe that?" Silas looked up then, eyes pale as winter. "I believe what I heard, miss. Screaming. For nights." She turned and walked away before he could say more. But his voice carried after her. "If it starts whispering, don't whisper back." That evening, Ruth locked every door and window. She refused to look toward the attic. But as the sun went down, the air changed again, thicker, heavier. The kind of quiet that swallows sound whole. She sat by the fire, pretending to read. Her aunt's letter lay on the table beside her, the red wax seal still intact. A gust of cold air blew through the room, snuffing the fire down to embers, and then she heard it again. A breath, drawn deep and slow through the walls. The floorboards flexed under her feet, in and out, like ribs expanding. Ruth backed away. The mirror on the wall trembled, and the reflection behind her began to move on its own. In the glass, she saw herself standing still. But the reflection smiled. A voice, faint and hollow, came from the staircase. "Ruth!" Her blood ran cold. It wasn't her aunt's voice this time. It was her own. The wind outside stopped. The fire went black, and in that darkness the old house exhaled, long and low, like it was alive again. By the third night, Ruth hadn't slept. Every time she closed her eyes, the house seemed to whisper. Her name, her heartbeat, even her thoughts. It echoed them all back, like it was learning her. But that night something new appeared, a light, thin as a thread, seeping from the cracks around the attic door. Flickering, slow, like a candle swaying in someone's hand. Ruth stared at it from her bed, frozen. She had locked that door herself. She had nailed it shut, and yet there it was, pulsing faintly like it was breathing. She told herself not to move, not to go near it. But curiosity is stronger than fear, and the silence of that house was worse than any scream. She lit a lamp and climbed the stairs. Each step groaned like something underneath was shifting awake. When she reached the landing, the light vanished. Total darkness, then a whisper right by her ear. "You came back." The lamp shattered. Ruth stumbled, glass cutting into her palms. Her breath came ragged. "Who's there?" she cried. The silence answered. And then, faintly through the walls, a hum, like an electrical current. But this was 1909. There was no power for miles. Her candle guttered. Something wet dripped from the ceiling. When she raised the light, she saw it, dark stains running down from the attic door. Blood. Ruth stumbled back, trembling. She fled downstairs, locking herself in the parlor. But as she turned, she saw the mirror again, her reflection. Wrong. It was smiling. Behind her reflection, the attic door stood wide open, and the light was back, brighter, closer. Ruth collapsed into the nearest chair, shaking. She grabbed her aunt's journal, flipping to the marked page she'd ignored before. The writing was uneven, half words, half drawings of veins and roots, and a final scrawled message. "The light in the attic is not light. It remembers every soul this house has taken. It waits for the blood to return." Ruth froze. Her own hand was bleeding from the glass cut. Drops of her blood were sliding across the wooden floor. Toward the base of the stairs, the house inhaled, the windows rattled. The fire roared to life by itself. And the portrait above the mantel, her aunt's portrait, burst into flames without touching it. From the burning frame, Ruth saw her aunt's face twist, eyes hollow and mouth open in a silent scream. Then the whisper came again. Through the walls, through her own bones. You fed it. Ruth, now it knows you. The entire house seemed to pulse. The floorboards rose like a chest taking breath. Every clock in the house struck midnight. At once, Ruth grabbed the keys and ran outside, barefoot into the cold night. But when she looked back, her blood ran cold. The windows of the house were glowing, every single one, filled with that same golden flickering light, and in the attic window, a shadow stood, perfectly still. Watching her, it looked just like her. By morning, the fire had gone cold, and Ruth was certain she'd dreamed the night before. The house looked calm again. The windows were dark. No glowing light, no whispering walls, but her hands still stung from the cuts, proof that something had happened. She made tea and tried to convince herself the fear was in her head. People go mad alone, she thought. It was isolation, grief, inheritance nerves. That's when she noticed the photograph. It was lying face down on the kitchen counter, the frame thick with dust. When she turned it over, her stomach turned. It was a family portrait. Aunt Eleanor stood in the center, smiling faintly. Beside her, 5 other figures, a man, 2 women, and 2 children. But one of the children's faces had faded completely. Not scratched out, not torn, just missing. A white blur where a person should be. Ruth rubbed at it with her thumb, thinking it might be damage. But the surface was smooth, untouched, and when she blinked, another face was gone. Now only 4 people remained. She dropped the photograph. It hit the floor, the glass shattering like a scream. Heart pounding, she opened her aunt's journal again. Near the back, she found a passage she hadn't seen before. The ink was darker, fresher than the rest. The faces fade as the blood thins. The house remembers the line. It takes back what belongs to it. Ruth's breath hitched. Bloodline. The inheritance wasn't just the house, it was something inside it. She grabbed her coat and ran back into town, straight to the church records. The local pastor, Father Emery, was startled to see her. When she mentioned the Mallory family, his expression turned grave. He led her to the back archives, hands trembling as he unlocked the cabinet. Inside were brittle birth records, yellowed with time. Your aunt. She wasn't the only one, he whispered. In 1872, there were 13 Mallorys living in that house. All gone by winter. No bodies ever found. Ruth stared, horrified. Gone. He nodded, just disappeared. And every time the photographs changed. One less face each time. She felt sick. Father, the light, the attic, what is it? He hesitated. Whatever's in that house, Miss Mallory, it isn't your aunt. It's what used her. Before she could reply, the church bell tolled. The sound echoed through the hills, deep and hollow, like the earth itself was warning them. Ruth turned to look out the church window. Far in the distance, through the fog and trees, she could see her house. A faint glow pulsed from the attic window again, even in daylight. By the time she returned home, the air inside was ice cold. The portrait on the wall, now cracked, hung crooked. Only 2 faces remained, her aunt. And her. She backed away, trembling. Every mirror in the house began to hum. Her reflection flickered, just like the faces in the photo. And then she heard her own voice whisper from behind the glass. It's almost ready. Ruth screamed and smashed the mirror with her lantern. Shards rained down, reflecting 1,000 flickering lights, each one showing her face, twisted in fear, each one smiling back. By the 5th night, Ruth stopped pretending she wasn't afraid. The house wasn't haunted. It was alive, and it wanted her to understand something. The portraits, the missing faces, the whispers that spoke in her own voice. It was all leading somewhere, to the attic. She tried to leave that morning. Packed her things, grabbed the keys, walked to the door, but when she opened it, there was nothing outside. No forest, no path, no sky, just darkness. Endless, breathing darkness. She slammed the door shut, gasping. And from upstairs came a soft, rhythmic hum. The same hum she'd heard that night when the light first appeared. She lit her lamp and climbed. The air grew heavier with each step, as if she was sinking underwater. At the top of the stairs, she saw something new, Symbols carved into the attic door, circles, lines, spirals. They glowed faintly when her light touched them. She reached out, and the moment her fingers brushed the wood, a cold shock ran through her body. Images flooded her mind. Flashes of her Aunt Eleanor standing in that same spot, drawing those same marks in blood. A voice whispered through her thoughts, "To inherit is to continue." The attic door creaked open, and Ruth stepped inside. It wasn't what she expected. No cobwebs, no dust. The air was strangely clean, like the room had been waiting for her. In the center stood a tall, iron machine. Pipes, wires, glass tubes filled with faintly glowing liquid. And inside the largest tube was her aunt. Eleanor Mallory's body stood perfectly upright, eyes closed, skin pale but unrotted. A mask of gold covered her face. The tubes pulsed gently, almost like veins. Ruth couldn't breathe. "What is this?" she whispered. Her aunt's voice came from behind her. "It's the inheritance, my dear." Ruth spun around, but the attic was empty. The voice echoed from everywhere at once. "I gave it life. Now it must be passed on." Ruth backed away, shaking. The machine began to hum louder, the lights flickering like a heartbeat. From the glass tube, Eleanor's hand twitched. A crack spread across the mask, and beneath it, something moved. The mask shattered. Ruth screamed. Her aunt's eyes snapped open, glowing faintly gold. "The blood must return to the source," the voice said. "You are the last." Ruth stumbled toward the stairs, but the attic door slammed shut behind her. The machine's wires whipped through the air, wrapping around her wrists, her throat, her arms. She struggled, gasping. Her blood smeared across the floor, lighting up the symbols in bright red. The whole attic pulsed. The house groaned. And from every wall came the same whisper, 1,000 voices, all her aunts, all the same. Inheritance complete. Ruth's vision blurred. The light turned white, then everything went silent. When she woke, she was lying on the attic floor. The machine was still. The glass tube was empty, and in the reflection of a broken mirror, she saw her own face, but her eyes glowed faintly gold. When Ruth woke, the sun had set. The house was silent again. But the silence was different. It wasn't the emptiness of before. It was the kind that listens back. Her head throbbed. Her hands shook. And when she wiped the blood from her face, her fingers came away, glowing faintly gold. She stumbled to the mirror on the attic wall. Her reflection blinked a second before she did, and the eyes staring back weren't hers. "Not fully," Aunt Eleanor's voice whispered behind her. "It's begun." Ruth spun around. The room was empty, but the air vibrated, like the house itself was speaking through the walls. Every pipe, every floorboard, every nail. They pulsed in rhythm with her heart. Ruth backed toward the stairs, but the door wouldn't budge. The wood seemed to breathe under her palms. And then she saw it, the veins, thin black lines spreading through the wallpaper, branching down from the ceiling like roots searching for her. They moved when she moved, following. She ran to the window and looked out. But there wasn't an outside anymore. The world beyond the house was gone, swallowed by swirling gold mist. The inheritance wasn't a home. It was a vessel. And now it had her. She dropped to her knees, clutching the journal. The pages were rewriting themselves, her aunt's handwriting shifting into her own. "The transfer is complete," it read. "Blood of the same line." Consciousness continued. "No," Ruth whispered. "I'm not you," the walls answered in Eleanor's voice. "You are now." The floorboards cracked beneath her. From the cracks seeped golden light, warm, steady, and alive. It spread across the attic floor, wrapping around her like vines. She felt her heartbeat sync with the hum of the house. One pulse, one rhythm, one life. Images flashed through her mind, memories that weren't hers. Eleanor standing in candlelight, cutting her palm with a ritual blade. The machine roaring to life. A whisper. "We are endless." Ruth screamed and tried to fight it, but her body wouldn't move. Her voice came out layered, hers and her aunt's speaking as one. The line must not die. The machine in the corner flickered back to life. The tubes filled with gold liquid once again. The air hummed like electricity. Ruth reached for the diary, trying to tear it apart, but the ink spilled out like blood, crawling up her arms, soaking into her skin. Every vein in her body glowed. The attic lights brightened until the walls themselves became transparent, and behind them shapes moved. Dozens of human silhouettes, whispering, reaching. They weren't ghosts. They were the Mallorys, all of them. Alive inside the walls, bound to the house, their mouths moved together in a low chant. The blood continues. The vessel awakens. The light grew unbearable. Ruth screamed, and in that instant the sound wasn't human anymore. Then silence. When it cleared, the attic was empty again. The machine still hummed softly, steady as a heartbeat. And in the glass reflection a woman stood perfectly still, her eyes faintly gold, her smile calm. She looked exactly like Ruth, and exactly like Eleanor. Weeks passed, but in Elder Hollow, time moved strangely after Ruth Mallory's visit. The locals said the sun stopped rising over the ridge. That every morning, fog rolled in earlier, and stayed longer. The Mallory house stood silent at the edge of the forest. Windows boarded, gate chained shut, but at night, the attic light still flickered. A search party went up there once, just once. The sheriff, 2 farmers, and Father Emery. They broke the door open, shouting Ruth's name. No answer. Inside, the house was cold and dry, like it hadn't been touched in decades. Dust coated everything except one thing, the floor leading up the stairs. Footprints, bare, small, fresh. When they reached the attic, the air felt thick, heavy, humming faintly. The sheriff said it smelled of iron and lilies. Father Emery refused to step inside. The others found the machine. The iron chamber was open, half melted. And the walls, they were covered in faces, hundreds of them. Pressed into the plaster like something had tried to escape, eyes open, mouths frozen in silent screams, and in the center of the room stood a woman. Perfectly still, skin pale, eyes gold. Hands folded as if in prayer. "Miss Mallory?" The sheriff whispered. She smiled, not wide. Not human, just wrong. They swore her lips moved, but the sound came from the walls. "You shouldn't have come." The sheriff raised his lantern. And in the brief flicker of light, they saw another woman standing behind her, identical, same eyes, same face. Then the light burst. And the room screamed. Only Father Emery made it back down the hill alive. He said the house breathed him out. Like an animal spitting out a bone, he couldn't stop shaking. He kept repeating one phrase over and over. It wasn't one woman. It was all of them. The sheriff and the 2 farmers were never found. But days later, strange objects appeared at the edge of the property. 3 lanterns, still burning, still warm. When the state investigators came, they tore the house apart. Every nail, every beam, every stone. No machinery, no bodies, just ash, and yet one thing survived, a photograph, sitting on the mantel. It showed 2 women standing side by side, both smiling faintly, both identical. On the back, written in old ink, was a single line, "Inheritance complete, 1909. The photo was sent to the University of Missouri, where it still sits in a sealed archive labeled Unexplained Phenomena, Case No. 147. In 1923, a group of scientists reopened the case. They tested the ink, the photograph, the paper. Everything dated correctly, 1909. But the strangest thing, each time they photographed the image for record-keeping, a third face appeared. No one could explain it. And after the lead researcher went missing in his own home, the case was closed again. The Mallory estate remains untouched to this day. Locals say on quiet nights, you can still hear breathing in the hills. And if you ever drive through the Missouri Ozarks, look toward the ridge just before dawn. Sometimes you'll see a light in the attic window and a woman standing there watching. The Ghastly Inheritance. 1909. Science still can't explain it,